Hello and welcome to the first episode of JournaTime. We hold discussions and sometimes debate about important and relevant topics of society which need to be talked about. I am Archan Kundu, your host and the session moderator. For today's discussion, our panelists are Ms. Pratiti Dhang, Mr. Abhirup Sengupta, Mr. Rijit Banerjee, and Ms. Ruchika Dubey. All of them are students of Media and Communication in Adamas University. Today, our topic of discussion is, do the new intermediary IT rules for the social media actually impact the freedom of speech in India? The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology introduced a set of new IT rules or intermediary rules on February 25th this year. It declared specific instructions for social media companies to follow, which would enable them to curb the dissemination of misinformation. The social media companies were granted 3 months' time to comply with the new rules, the period ending on May 25th. Since then, news headlines have erupted with controversies between social media companies and political institutions. Some social media houses even accuse that the new IT rules will choke the freedom of speech of the people. So today, we are going to have an opinion-based discussion on the ingenuity and need of the new IT rules and whether they actually threaten freedom of speech in India. To begin with, I would like to go to Ms. Pratiti Dhang to speak on the topic.
Hello everyone. So when I speak about the new IT rules that has been introduced by the government, I would say how much secure and safe the new IT rules might sound to many, it's still undefined in certain ways. When we talk about the new rules, it has a term that this intermediaries like Facebook and Twitter, they will have a certain body who will be taking reports monthly on what, and they will be deciding what is wrong and what is right on the content that has been posted on those social media platforms. So when this bodies plays a role in the social media platforms, what happens is we lack the freedom of speech and expression, the right that we have. In certain ways, it also affects the democracy. Also, when we see the new ID rules, there has been a word mentioned about the public order in the new IT rules. So there has been different ways that it secures the safety of the women, children, and what kind of content that has been posted. But when they talk about public order, what does this public order mean? As especially standing in the current scenario what India is in, we can recall few months back when the farmer protest was taking place in India, the government asked Twitter to ban a certain amount of Twitter accounts just because they were supporting the farmer protest. So we don't know what those public order means. And when the government actually chooses what is right and what is wrong, especially like during this protest, we can't understand like the government will have all this authority over those contents and they will choose. But whereas at the same time, it is also beneficiary because we can also predict the flow of fake news. In this COVID times, like we saw like how the flow of fake news was there over the social media platforms. But again, there is a flaw in it, which is when it predicts the first person who has been spreading this message. Okay, that's right. We can predict like who actually did it. But in case of platforms like WhatsApp, where this encryption policy is there, it is very hard to detect who actually did it. And also, actually, the third party also gets an access to all those private chats that has been in going over the social media platforms. That's all I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dhang. After this, I would like to move on to Mr. Abhirup. Please share your comments.
I firmly believe that no oversight can be termed in the binary, and like of it being good or like bad, and no authority can truly be objective. So, at the absolute core, the government of India basically wanted to be the sole judge of like the conflicts arising from the social media, which affects the or is basically like illegal. Now, obviously, all social media have rules that coincide with the government rules, like their internal rules. And most of them are dealing with like murder threats, rape threats, or other cyberbullying or cyber crimes. These are not the problem, but the new rules state that the social media platform basically have like required to acknowledge the complaint within 24 hours. This complaint is by like the government of India. Any kind of disputes over any certain like social media post or any social media user. Now, what I feel is the problem is the way Indian government can use this law. And India is like one of the only countries that still uses like implements sedition law under the section 124 of like the Indian Penal Code. And again, as Ms. Dhang mentioned, in January 2019, actually, more than 3,000 protesters like 3,000 protesters of against the Citizenship Amendment Act were charged with the sedition, while in 2019, more than 3,300 farmers were charged with sedition for protesting about like land disputes. This issue popped back in early Feb, as Ms. Dhang also mentioned, when the rule was introduced to the public, and Twitter declined to like follow through some of the requests of the government. Now, previously, what used to happen was Section 69A was to like be implemented for like by Indian government to block these tweets and social media posts or social media users. But now Twitter blocked some accounts which were clearly in the violation and blocked other accounts only in India and not other countries. Twitter like clearly mentioned in their blogs addressing this issue, addressing the government's claim that they didn't comply with the blocking requests and everything. And Twitter mentioned that they thought that it didn't violate their internal rules, though they thought like removing them would be removing these users or removing these posts would be against like the freedom of speech. Also, like the new rule more or less say that social media platforms will have to take down the content within like 36 hours upon receiving the orders from the government. So the rapid timeline of 36 hours will prevent the social media platform from evaluating the cases on their own. And so they practically cannot challenge the government's order on certain cases. Now, the other issues, as also mentioned by Ms. Dhang, is that the new rule also says that the government wants traceability of messages on platforms like WhatsApp or other, which provides E2E or end-to-end encryption. And in theory, like services like WhatsApp cannot even see what the user sent as it's end-to-end encrypted, and the decrypted message only exists on the local devices of the users. So if the government wants, like, so the government, when it says that WhatsApp needs to provide traceability, means that they would have to vastly change this encryption process. And this would bring both privacy and security issues, where the messages could be intercepted by anybody who has access to the end nodes. And so in my opinion, although the government did these new IT rules for the sake of public empowerment on social media and like on the internet, considering how they use the sedition to silence people who are criticizing the government, was to like prevent them from using this law to implement more adverse methods under these new IT rules. And beyond that, how would the government ensure that they won't selectively use these laws to target like some certain people, or they won't be like selective or object or biased against their own like pro-government supporters who are kind of violating these rules? I think how they mention these laws and their outcomes or like the repercussions that these laws would have, the violation of these rules would have, I think they're a little vague there. And it needs to be well defined and by the government, as well as like it needs to be well defined by the social media platforms as well. So that's all.
Thank you, Abhirup. Now I would like to go on to Mr. Rijit to have his comments on the topic.
So my perspective on the newest IT rules is that, as a human civilization, we are moving forward. And the most thing at the most core of it is the IT rules or the digitalization of the services, right? So when the whole rule set is getting a lot of heat from the audience, everyone is scared about the privacy. I would like to highlight a few advantages of the IT rules, right? So first of all, it provides a better standpoint for the government to monitor the fake news, as Ms. Hung already mentioned. And not only that, if you have read the whole rule set properly, you would see a lot of things which are unnecessarily on the internet, such as nudity. And I'm pretty sure that you might have come across these in as in posts or as in tweets, which are very, very harmful to the children. Now, I know there has been a lot of fake accounts which are made by children to access the social media, but that's not the root of the problem, right? So first of all, it benefits the government to more accessibly control the flow of messages in a protected environment, which actually benefits everyone. Many of the popular celebrities have left to platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram so that they would lead a healthier life. That shouldn't be the case. Social media is bridging the gap between the virtual worlds and the physical worlds. That shouldn't be the case. People should feel safe here. So like these rules should be going in that direction. Next up is that it creates a lot of jobs. We are like there are, as Mr. Dhang mentioned, it has a lot of steps or committees that go through the messages or like report directly to the government. So many people are getting the jobs, the job roles such as CEO, or many people are getting the jobs. So that's a good sign for any country whose GDP is dropping like flies. Now, coming to the main issue, which we have come here to address, is that the censorship, right? So if the government is controlling, do we even trust the government? That's the first point, right? Do we even trust the government to see our messages? Do we do that? So, well, the answer is kind of a double-edged sword, right? At one point you can say that it's the government at the end. They wouldn't want the bad for us, right? So they would like have a good environment which has the equal rights for everyone, right? But at the same time, as Mr. Sengupta mentioned, that the sedition law, which is still a law to this day, which was introduced by the British India in India, and it hasn't been removed ever since. Like nobody thought of that, removing that law. So when we see an emergence of rules like that, which gives more potency to the existing ruling government, it kind of scares the common people, right? So when we see this new IT rules, governing the whole area, we as people should always be informed of the changes that the government makes, right? If there is a message removed, there should be explanation for that. So in order to applicate these, we as citizens don't believe in that. How would it actually go on and be an actual thing in the country? So my opinion on the whole situation is that we need a more clear and more refined framework of laws, which actually appeals to the citizens of India. And when we say vagueness, or when we say like something which is not even mentioned, we need to clear those steps up. We need to finish them up, because if we don't do that, it would be just another thing where the government misuses it and uses it for to spread further its propaganda. We already know so many IT cells which have been working through actively throughout the elections. So much funding going into those. That is there for a reason. That is there for targeting the young population of the country. So when we target about these, we have to maintain a certain clarity in the rules and make sure that it happens transparently and the citizens are not held liable for their own words, which actually constitutes to the Constitution of India as the freedom of expression. It shouldn't violate that. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. Now, after him, I would like to go on to our final speaker, who will give us her opinion on this topic. Ms. Dubey, please take the mic.
Good evening, everyone. So, thank you, Archan, for having me here. And I'd like to talk about the aim of IT rules and why it is like important and how it is not violating the freedom of speech and expression. Though I agree to Mr. Abhirup and about the fact that yes, there are certain barriers to the it's not crystal clear. The rules need to be mended a little bit to to work exactly. Like we don't know the objectives of the rules. Like we are not clear about it yet. But the aim of the rule is to safeguard people in the world of social media. If there are all of us uses social media, this IT rule is making social media a better space and a safe place to be in. Like on social media platforms, there are, especially on WhatsApp, there are so many WhatsApp forwards, which people tend to believe, and they forward without knowing that is it true or not, and they just keep on forwarding, and after a point of time it leads to somewhere like people start believing it, and it's a fake news. Like nobody knows the source of it. People just felt that it's right, and they just kept on forwarding it, which leads to like delusion all over the internet. Like people tend to believe the news because it has been forwarded by like so many sources, so many places. Second thing I want to talk about, that Ministry of Electronics and MEIT, by like Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, in February they brought this IT rules, right? The motive was just to do better for the people, because during the elections we have seen, like after election in Bengal, post poll violence, like there were fake images all over the internet. People were believing that there was, yes, there was violence that happened after TMC was declared as the winner, but there was fake images of like some mobbed images of women which were circulating all over the internet, which people believe that that is the situation in Bengal, and that is why we need IT rules. And Mr. Abhirup talked about traceability. Yes, right now India's situation in terms of technology is not that great that we can really, and it also violates the privacy of the consumer. If we trace the, like if we break the end-to-end encryption part and start tracing, then how come we are going to know that like what is the source of the information? How will things change ultimately? And if so many social media platforms, including Facebook, has agreed to it, why Twitter is having a problem? Like our privacy, I want to say that Google and Android, these things already know everything about us. Like our privacy is already in their hands. So all I can say is like I think these rules are just for like for the sake of us. Yes, I agree to the fact with Abhirup said that there is no like clarity in the law. Like we don't know that what exactly this law is going to like benefit us with. But I think this is very important to have this law because there has been so many fake SOS during the times of second wave of COVID. Like people were just tweeting randomly, and there were so many cases which were where like there was not that person available who needed the blood or the bed or oxygen cylinder. It was just a fake news. And I will also like to put light on this matter that Telegram uses a lot of CSAM material. So people like teenagers don't even know that they are being traced, or their mock photos and videos are being leaked all over the social media sites. They are not aware about it. So these IT rules are important to put an end to it. That's my opinion about it.
Thank you, Ruchika. So, after listening to all the four speakers, we are very clear that even though these laws are needed for the tracking of misinformation, we have to come to a point where we have to decide what do we prefer more. Is it the misinformation, or is it our privacy? Because if we are to track that misinformation, somewhere we have to sacrifice our privacy. Now, no matter if we were sacrificing privacy till now on Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media sites, it didn't come down to WhatsApp because of the end-to-end encryption, as Abhirup mentioned. But now that even the end-to-end encryption might be broken on WhatsApp or Signal, it's not just the data, it's private chats which can be stolen. It is private information which can be stolen. It is private opinions which can be stolen. It is a person's whole personality, his discussion with others, which can be stolen, not only by institutions, but by hackers as well. So I would like to propose a question to all the four of you, that which one do you prefer? The controlling of this misinformation, which might control, the lawyers might control them. They are not stopping the generation of misinformation, but they are just taking them down a bit. Or will you sacrifice or do you prefer your privacy? The question goes to Pratiti first.
So when you talk about privacy or the flow of misinformation, there is another thing that also concerns us. As I already mentioned, the democracy. So when we talk about the privacy part, We most of the Indians obviously don't want the India to turn into a China or a North Korea. Definitely not, where the government will have all the access to all our private informations. And furthermore, talking about it, like India lacks one of the biggest laws that is required, especially in this generation, that is data protection law. Okay, we don't have any data protection law at this era. So when also there is like nobody knows, like after even like they get the information, like who to whom is this information going to? Is it still being recorded only by the government, or is it being still being uh, accessed by the third party? So this is one of the biggest concern. Also, when I talked about the democracy part, so when these contents are flowing, it's at the end of the day, it's the government body who is going to decide, is this content right or wrong. When I mentioned about the public order, a public order can be anything. It's not defined as such. What does a public order means? When I actually talked about also like, okay, I am giving an example. We know about the Disha Ravi case, where there was this toolkit given by the Greta Thunberg and she shared it and there was her access over it. Okay, right. She got arrested for it. Nobody knows, like these cases can be still be continuing and the government will have all the access to it. They will be knowing what this chats are going, and especially it's very difficult, like as Abhirup also like talked about it, the end-to-end encryption method that the WhatsApp is having. Especially in this time, it's very difficult to decide. But yes, both can be balanced. Privacy can also be in these safe hands, and also this flow of fake information, what you say, can be also be stopped if we have a proper defined law. What this new IT Act lacks is a defined law which states everything correct. We are not aware like how is it going to function. This law is lacking that. So we really need this at this point. That's all I would like to comment on this.
So a need for definition comes up from this, and I would like to know whether you all agree with it, and so simultaneously please answer my previous question, Mr. Abhirup.
Yes, I believe I actually disagree with Ms. Dhang. I do believe that balance should be there, but India simply, actually not only India, several governments lack that infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, to properly guarantee or to properly ensure that they will be getting these things done. And let me explain, let me elaborate by saying that even if like they get the access of about like exabytes of data from social media about like let's say the violations and everything, how will they monitor it, and how will WhatsApp even monitor it? Billions of messages are sent even in every day in India itself. We have over like 500 million social media users. Assuming that WhatsApp is like one of the popular social media or like messaging services that exist in India, Signal is not so much there, but WhatsApp is there. And how will even Facebook, which is okay, it's a pretty big company, or even let's say I'm going to be talking about Facebook because it's the most biggest social media company and owning both WhatsApp and Instagram. So how will they ensure that enough computational power is there to handle these exabytes of data, to scour through exabytes of data and guard those against, let's say, as Rijit Banerjee and Pratiti as well as Ruchika mentioned, that how would we even prevent those who are attacking people on social media or like let's say trolling them or threatening them, because these would need to be traced by some kind of computational powers or any machine learning algorithm, right? So how India simply does not have that, Indian government simply does not have the way to handle that data, even if they get it from the social media companies. And the social media companies would also need to like invest a lot of money, which would be ultimately to cater only India's privacy laws. So I don't think that it's viable at all. I think that Facebook will keep on fighting this law as they like drag the Indian government to the court over this law. And as I mentioned, the encryption issues of like the WhatsApp. So I think they will keep on fighting. And I think the balance is really hard to strike about how to safeguard people online and the free internet as we know it.
Okay, thank you, Abhirup. A very good point which he mentioned was that how is the data going to be monitored? Well, I would like to bring in bring to your attention, everyone's attention, that the social media bodies are accountable to any complaint within 24 hours, and the post against which the complaint has been made by anyone needs to be taken down within 15 days, and steps have to be taken. Now, the irony is that the call whether a post is right or wrong is about a person's freedom of speech. And that is not something that the company can decide, because the company is just a mediary. It's a medium, like a telephone or like a mic. So if you cut that, that means you are harming the freedom of speech. And that is something the decision is supposed to be taken by the judiciary of the country. So you can't decide that. A social media body or the executive of the country can't decide that. So what they have to take down or they shall not. So I will move on to Rijit, what he has to say on this.
See, first of all, we are talking a lot about piracy, right? Like, sorry, privacy. My bad. Privacy. So basically, privacy, as we all know, it is myth in this today's modern era, right? Like every company has access to our chats, and we all know that. It's not like something like very, out of the box kind of a thing. So when we have writers in 1840s writing about big brother who is watching over every activity of us, I think in today's era IT rules are very, very important. They are of primordial importance, right? So when we think about these systems coming into India, the questions that you already mentioned, that the question of applying them, or applying them on the surface level seems very easy to listen to, but on a core level, it's very hard to implicate, right? So when we are defining the core or structure of the IT laws, we need to make sure that it compiles with every citizen of India and everyone gets their voice heard and nobody gets liable to anything that they said. Although the point is to strict toxicness or something like that, but the point should be like that everyone should have their opinion to speak, but they shouldn't be punished for that. And already we know the ludicrous system of the Indian judiciary. It's so long, it's so time consuming. When you take into account that every day 1 billion messages will be assessed, although people are getting new jobs, they will be there to monitoring the chats, but people are not that satisfied with this, right? People will not be able to do this much. Otherwise, an AI or something is involved in the process. So again, the whole process needs to be rethinked, I think, and needs to be on the surface level with everything that we have said right now.
Now, we know that from what Rijit said, that everything is being done very haphazardly. So everything needs time. So this law, if you want to cut down the misinformation flow, you need time. So that AI has to be prepared, and the social media companies has to the government has to work with the social media companies, and they need to work together to formulate it. We can see the controversies around where the government and the social media companies, they are working against each other rather than working together. So that is a problem. And about the freedom of speech part, Ruchika, please make your comments.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with Ms. Pratiti when she said that the law needs to be defined properly. And I also agree with Rijit when he said that there is nothing called privacy, because Google and Android already has the access to all our data and information, our social media accounts, everything. So there is nothing called privacy. And when I come to this WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption part, yes, it is like dangerous scenario to imagine that there will be no privacy of chats, like personal chats can be leaked and stuff like that. But when there was this Sushant Singh Rajput case, the whole scenario, Deepika Padukone, then there were so many actors and actresses whose their chats were already leaked. Like we were seeing some screenshots all over the internet and there was this chaos about it. So how are we sure that it's not already happening? And how can we say that after the IT rule basically implements, then it will start to happen? How can we say that? My question is that. And secondly, if it's about violating freedom of speech and expression, partly yes, because there is no definition to it, because we are not aware, just like the way Pratiti said, that we are not aware that what exactly will happen and who will control and where are these data going and what is happening. So if government wants to implement these laws, they need to be very definite and proper and about the objectives of the law. But there are certain things which cannot go beyond the liberty and sovereignty of the country, where things needs to stop. That's why there is sedition, and that's why there is like that is why it's very important for the IT rules to IT rules to be implemented. So yeah, this is my take to it.
Okay, Ruchika, but this sovereignty and everything, which which is not being well defined, which is just being stated as public disorder in the new rules, can don't you think it's very subjective? And the government can accuse anything which they don't like, because at the end governments are political bodies. They can accuse anything which they don't like, which goes against them, to be of public disorder.
Yeah, just like it was happening with Twitter, and people were claiming that there were tweets against Modi government, which was being like pulled down by Twitter, and it was said that it's a paid thing. But I just want to know that for the sake of right to freedom of speech and expression, are we allowed to say anything and everything? I just have this question which I asked, that is there no limitations to it? Like, what do we mean by freedom of speech and expression? Like going out absolutely like anything about the government or anybody, and then to a point where it gets subjective. Like sometimes, like during the election time, there was like people claim that the news were that the tweets were taken down and stuff like that, but the amount of fake tweets was like, there were a lot of tweets which were fake, that those things were not happening. But because of those tweets and everything, it got circulated that okay, this is the scenario and this is what is happening. Same happened during when the second wave was hitting. There was fake SOS. So why should not we take those things down?
So if to take those things down, if we surrender our freedom of speech, at sense you ask the question, what exactly is freedom of speech? Yes, we consider that when we open up, everything to be can be said, anything can be said, including lies. There needs to be a filter, but for that filter, the government is not the one who will make the decision, right? Like, to the whole panel, my question is the government the one who should take the decision whether a lie is considered as freedom of speech, or is it the judiciary?
I would like to answer that. When government decides it, we need to know on what categories they are going to decide. So as there are a lot of things mentioned which are still undefined, that one I was already saying about the public order, like what does the public order means. And also when Rijit mentioned that these new IT rules or like needs to be like worked together, like as you, I guess it's what it was you who mentioned about it. It needs to be worked with the social media companies, and there needs to be a AI setup for it, as Rijit mentioned. So, like then again, Ruchika mentioned about the flow of fake news. So, as you see, this like of news, it takes a minute or 1 hour for a news to flow over the internet. Okay, it can't be stopped. Okay, but however, it can be taken down by a certain AI tool or a new kind of software that can be introduced by the government. Okay, there are certain toolkits that can detect fake news. So why don't we work on something that can actually take it down by the AI rather than not being decided by the government? Because one, it goes to the government deciding if this is right or wrong. We don't know because they have their own propaganda behind it. If we see the laws and the bills has been passed by the government in the past 2 years, like those had some or the other kind of propaganda behind them, even though there was motive being told other, or but it was again there was something propaganda being flowed with these laws being introduced and bills being introduced. So how can this fake news can be stopped? It's it's again like the government who needs to decide with a certain AI tool can be infused which can detect it, and like that's how this news can be like detected, and that's the only solution that we have right now, I think.
I would like to take that for conversation forward. So when we talk about the whole IT laws, as Prati mentioned, so what I think is that the government cannot be like, given the right to like have access to all these messages. Although they are the one forming the law, they shouldn't have access to all the messages, because it's pretty clear, or it's pretty evident that when you have a government, they will have their biases, right? And we don't want to be a target to a training, right? So what I feel should be done is that the safeguard of the whole system should be under the government. That is for sure. Okay, that goes out without any debate. But there should be a direct committee under the judicial system that should overlook the whole process. That should directly respond to the judiciary, and that should work closely with them. And they shouldn't be like answerable to the ruling government or any government for that matter.
See, I would like to add, as Pratiti mentioned, that we need some AIs that wouldn't be working for the government. But according to the to counter your point, Pratiti, who do you think will set the parameters for this AI or like the machine learning used to cover through the exabytes of data of like the social media posts or user profiles who violate these IT? And then to counter Ms. Dubey's point, the Android and Google, some of the data about like third-party apps, they are stored in our local devices itself. They do not necessarily leave our devices unless it's accessed by those third-party data, third-party apps themselves. So Google does not actually have all their data. I mean, theoretically, yeah, sure, they can be evil, but theoretically, they don't own the data that we have. Unless it's from like a Google app, or unless like the third party has given specifically permission to that have that Google integration sort of. And WhatsApp's encryption, for that matter, as you mentioned that Sushant Singh Rajput, during Sushant Singh Rajput's case, a lot of screenshot was like floating around the internet, chat access, and now WhatsApp didn't send those things. WhatsApp didn't give those access to the media houses, right? It has to be human error. And now WhatsApp says that it's end-to-end encrypted. It's very unlikely that any kind of employee that is available at or is working for WhatsApp in the Indian or in even like foreign, they would give they would find those medias of like the screenshots and they would send that to the Indian media houses. So we are ruling out that option. So it comes down to human errors about like, again, this is allegedly about whoever had access to the phones of Sushant Singh Rajput after his death. So that's how I would suggest that the screenshots got.
Okay, there is a very good point here that it is a human error. So it's not, the bodies are not accountable because they are just the medium. Of course, they are accountable for tracing those. Of course, they are accountable for what sort of, if there is a post which misinforms people, they are accountable to take that down. But they are not accountable for the criminal part where it is being created, because they did not create it. So it was created by a human being. So for everyone, the question is for everyone, what do you think, which is more effective here to inform the people, to bring in a media literacy from childhood in among the citizens, and even now, or the IT rules, which somewhat forbids the dissemination of misinformation while sacrificing freedom of speech? It does not stop its creation, but media literacy up to some extent can stop that.
I absolutely agree with Archan in this point that media literacy is actually the only correct way to deal with the, let's say, fake information, or even let's say cyberbullying or other things, because the IT rules proposed by the government, and the government, or be it any like third party social media platforms, they don't simply have that infrastructure to deal with like scouring through and handling every bit of data that comes from like that gets pinged up due to some kind of a violation to these certain laws, that certain internal laws that the social media might have, social media platform might have, or the laws of set by the new IT rules, or even like the existing IT rules. So that's my take on it. I don't think that there simply is an infrastructure to deal with this. Our government, obviously, as Rijit mentioned, there will be a lot of bureaucracy, and the timeline that they provide the social media platforms to like mitigate a certain complaint from the government about a certain, let's say, post or like a certain profile, then there is simply not enough time for the social media companies to cut through the red tapes and the bureaucracy and to challenge if something is like, let's say going against the freedom of speech, or if something is wrongfully pinged by the government. And again, I think Rijit also mentioned the IT cell, and how is the government ensuring that IT cell, or like most part in the IT cells, or like the tweets made by the IT cell, or whatever about like pro government stances, whoever might have those profiles, or like social media users, if they like say tweet some fake news or tweet something that is like not necessarily right, not necessarily accurate, and but it is like pro government, then how do we deal with that? Does government even bother to ping that up? That's my take on it. So there simply does not exist like a infrastructure, and it won't exist until like lot of machine learning development or like the AI development to deal with this. There's simply not enough like data management facilities available to deal with this. And India's, and not only India, many other countries, as well as the social media platforms, the biggest social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, they simply don't have a way to handle these things. They don't have a way that is like capable enough to deal with all of this new implementation. But the way they have is, it is like very primary stage, the filtration part of it. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Dhang?
Yes. Talking about the media literacy part, I would agree with you to certain extent, because it would actually like reduce the number of cases, or maybe like it would actually curb the situation, but it won't stop it completely, right? Or it won't be stopping in future, because the cases will be happening. But what is the concern like about it? It is punishment, penalty for these crimes that will be happening. When we discuss about the IT laws, these laws are being introduced just to penalize those. So my biggest concern is, so when actually like also answering to Abhirup's question, which is actually the solution that has been given by Rijit, is having an independent body which will be working directly with the judiciary, not with the government. Because as I already mentioned, because government might have certain propaganda, but judiciary is an independent body, because when they work under those, there are chances they won't have any influence under the government. This is the only solution that we have right now. And yeah, I would also say it again, that this laws needs to be defined more by this body, and like this will be the body who will be defining the laws, under what circumstances this certain content will be taken down, or will be actions will be taken against those people who are producing this content over those platforms.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak on it? Rijit or Ruchika?
Yes, I'll agree to what Pratiti said, because yes, she's right that there needs to be punishment, like that somebody's committing an offense. For instance, if we take the recent case which happened last year, the boys' locker room case, it was a total Instagram scandal that happened. And when you go through the case, the end solution was nobody was penalized because they were underage. They were not 18, so they were not penalized. I think there was one guy who was I think an adult, and he was not penalized. It's just his phone was seized by the police. So this was the thing which happened. So I completely agree to Pratiti that we need more definition to this law, and a proper punishment. Like, people needs to be scared before committing these.
I would like to interrupt. I'm sorry. I would like to interrupt for both of you that penalizing would not fall under the IT rules, because the IT rules never declare what is the punishment. They just declare how will you stop the misinformation flow. So the penalizing part will not fall under. So we can't consider penalization here, right? That goes under cybercrime.
When we talk about the laws, I would like to answer. When we talk about the laws, it's the legislation, right? How it will function, because those are the ways, like those are the guidelines how this laws or the penalties will be decided, like on what course this will be done. Those are the basic structure on which it will be formed, right? If those are not defined, if those are not right, how can we move further, and how can we form a better judicial structure or legislative structure to function? Because we need to get our base right, which is actually lacking at this point. Media literacy is a solution, but it's just the 50% of it. At least we need to reduce the amount, which is 100%. We need to reduce the amount to at least 80% of it. But what about the 30%? How can we curb it? We need to get the base right. We need to decide the legislation first so that we can criminalize.
Yes, Ruchika, please.
Yeah, so I was just saying that yes, I agreed. See, this is the thing that I agree to Pratiti completely, that there needs to be and I also agree to Abhirup when he said that we need to have a proper infrastructure for it. Like, yes, we are lacking on the infrastructure department, and we don't have proper like people and proper infrastructure to like implement this law. But yes, like if there is like when we make a law, there needs to be certain factors which we have to keep in mind and punishment comes under it. Right. So that is how it is considered. It is to be
Okay. So at the end, we again come down to redefining the law, being more specific as to what will be considered as misinformation, which one will be monitored. So those things need to be looked into. What we found out after the whole discussion was that a redefinition, a new committee which won't be influenced by the executive or the government, it will stand independent with the judiciary so that the decisions can be taken, because the judiciary is actually needed to take those decisions. And to up to some extent, we can't deny that all of this can't be stopped by these laws. So to stop them or to minimize them, to minimize the human error, we have to go down to media literacy from the base, and we need to educate the children for the next generation so that they don't create and disseminate this misinformation. So I will be ending our session today here. Thank you all the panelists, and see you all next time. Please follow us on Facebook, our main blog site, Journa Post, and see you next time. Thank you.